Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. Most of the work done in bonsai is gradual changes over the years. But today, it's going to be quite a dramatic change for my larch forest. Today I'll be pruning out my larch forest and repotting it from its nursery seed tray pot into a mica bonsai pot. Here today in the bonsai zone. I last repotted this forest 2 years ago, and I separated all the trees and root pruned them individually. This year I'm going to try and lift the forest out as one unit. So I've been letting the trees grow, and hopefully all the roots have filled the soil and I can lift it out in one piece. The individual trees won't fall apart from each other. Before I begin the repotting, I'll prune all the trees back to size, and it'll put less stress on the root system. I'm going to start on one of the smaller trees to the right hand side of the planting. So up top here, I'm going to prune quite severely, leaving about this much of the new growth. At the base of any of these needles on a larch is a dormant bud. You can also see buds that are developing. Here's a close-up of the branch, and you can see at the base of some of the needles there's already a bud developing. When I'm pruning larch branches, I don't have to prune back to a visible bud. At the base of each needle is a dormant bud that will develop. I'm trying to prune between the needles so I don't get much browning at the tips. As I start to move down the tree with my pruning, I'll be leaving more and more new growth on the tree as I get down to the lower branches. I've got the first tree in the forest pruned up, this one here, and a healthy larch will put out 3 to 4 spurts of growth each summer. As it grows each time, the needles get shorter and shorter, so fall is a really good time to show a larch tree. I'll continue pruning up the rest of the forest, and then we'll come back for the repotting. I finished pruning the larch forest back to size. There is a few branches that I lost over the winter. I'll show you those. Here's a close-up of some of the branches that I lost over the winter. So I'll definitely be bringing the trees back into the basement for the winter this coming year. I think it's safer bringing them indoors. Here's a good example of clip and grow. I let the trees grow before I clip them back. If you're always clipping your tree, overworking it, the tree will get weak and die. So you should always let your trees grow, put on some lush growth, get them out of shape so they look all like a shaggy bush, and then prune them back. It's time for the moment of truth now. I'm going to lift the forest out of the pot, and hopefully it'll come out in one piece. So here I go. I'll grab it by the biggest trees. I'll take away my rock actually first. Make it a little lighter. All right, here I go. It feels loose in the pot. It came out in one piece, that's good. I'll get the drainage screens in the new pot, and then we'll lift it into place and position the forest. I'll put down a base layer of soil in the pot, just a shallow layer. So this is a mica pot. It's made of 80% mica and 20% polyethylene. So it's very durable. It won't crack or chip or break. I'm going to lift the forest into its new pot now. I'll want the main tree probably about 1/3 of the distance in the pot, so right about here. So I'll try and do that when I position it, get that main tree about here in the pot. So here I go. Somewhere about there, I think. I'll have a look from the front now and see how it's looking. I'm looking at the larch forest from the distance now, and my initial impression is that it looks too symmetrical in the pot. So I think I've got to shift the entire forest towards the right-hand side. So I'll try that. I think that's shifted to the right a little too much, so I'll move it back to the left. Maybe go halfway between. I think that's looking a little better. I'm going to shave down those corners so it sits down on the bottom of the pot properly, and then I'll have another look at it. So it's sitting quite high in the pot. I'm wondering if it would look better flush. I might have to take some soil off the bottom and lower it all down. I don't mind having a hill, but I just don't want the front of it to be so high off the lip of the pot like that. And I want some areas that are level with the lip of the pot, so I get a change of elevation. I've got the forest back in the pot now in its new lowered position, and I think it looks a lot better. I'm going to fill in the rest of the pot now with soil and see how the composition looks. One of the things I wanted to correct with this repotting was the position of the trees. If you look in the forest now, you can see that this one's on a bit of an angle, the main tree's on a bit of an angle. So I want to correct that. I want to get all the trees vertical. To me, vertical trees look like a mature forest. When they're on an angle, they look like younger trees to me. So I'll have to put a mound of soil beneath the roots to angle the tree more vertical and try and correct all the positions. So I'll play around with that now and see if I can accomplish that. I've got the trees vertical now. It didn't take too much work. I just had to, mound some soil up underneath the side that was low, and it kind of corrected the straightness of the tree. I'm not very happy with the landscaping at the moment. I always had the hill the highest on this side, and then it kind of tapered from the highest point to a medium height, and then the lowest height in this side of the forest. And right now it's all kind of just even. So I want to correct that. I want to, get this back to the highest point over here and maybe level off some of these areas. And some of it may be just that the moss has grown really thick and needs pruning. I'm going to start the landscape work in this corner here, trying to get it lower, clean out all these weeds so you can see the trunks of the trees. Yeah, they got some good roots, those weeds. I'm glad I got them out. Yeah, so I'll keep an eye on those in case, more sprout up from the soil. I'll keep them pruned back. So the moss is very thick in this area. You can see my finger, it's at least that thick. I'll get out the curved scissors, start pruning the moss back. I'll prune it back as far as I can get it anyway before it, starts turning a brown color. I think there's a rock in here that's completely covered by the moss. So this is a shade kind of moss. It looks like almost like little ferns. And it grows really well. Especially now that the forest floor is getting quite shady with the trees. I'll create some moss bushes. So just prune around and leave one spot high with the moss. And it'll slowly develop into a bush over the years. I can put another one back here. The moss is really thick here. It was hiding the entire trunk of this tree. I should mention why I'm repotting this forest midsummer. The best time to repot hardy trees like larches and maples is in spring, just before the buds start to break. The second best time is about midsummer. In the heat, the trees go dormant, so you can repot them quite safely. I'm thinking of maybe putting a river or a shoreline over on the left-hand side of the planting to kind of make it look like an island or a coastal feature. Alright, it's time to search for rocks. I've got a few here that will probably look good. That one looks pretty good there. That one probably back there looks good too. Just need a couple for the front here. I was trying to arrange the rocks to get a nice coastal shoreline, but I couldn't find anything that worked. It just didn't look right. I did shift the trees to the left a little bit. It looked a little off balance. I was studying the design, so I shifted everything this way. It does look a little symmetrical right now, but I think it looked better. It looked too crowded over to the right hand side here. I will use the rocks along the edge of the pot here. I don't know if I'll have two this side or maybe one on the other side. I've got the rocks positioned each side, one on this side and one on the other side. I think that looks pretty good. So I'll work on these transitions from the bare soil, tapering it up into the landscape. I'm applying moss to the left hand side here. Just building up a hill and making a transition from the pot to the hill. I'm working away on the landscape. I'll probably be jumping around. It's the kind of thing that you've got to work on all at once. You can't sort of do specific areas. I've got a lot of work to do on the landscape. I got to get it tapered down here. It's just too heavy in this area. A lot of this is moss here, so I'll keep pruning it away and see what kind of a slope I can get from the high point here down to the lowest part. I'm kind of clearing out the moss at the base of all the trees too, so I can see where the root flare starts, so they're not buried in soil and moss. So you can see I'm kind of creating some more little moss bushes. And I'm starting to prune around the back one here, which is getting quite large. I'm starting to rough in the pathway with some sand. My path is going to come down the steps here around the front of the tree, and then I have to have it go somewhere. And I kind of put this rock here, so I might have to move that and put that somewhere else so I can continue my path around, sort of around the back of the planting here. So I'm going to move these rocks for now, and I'm going to get my path established. So I'll have to build that up with a bit of soil there. And I might have to reposition some of this moss to kind of make a flat pathway here. That can disappear around the back then, like that. I'll continue the sand pathway around here, like that. Almost needs a step in there. If I can find a rock, that would look quite good, I think. That path will just sort of disappear around the back here. It just gets smaller and smaller and then sort of fade away. Okay, I'll give that a water. Like that. Make sure it stays level here. That's starting to look better. I want to run the path up the stone steps and between these two moss bushes, so they definitely need some pruning. They're looking like moss blobs, not bushes. So, and I've got to prune all this moss flush into a pathway here also. Make some room to get between here. I'm working around the back now. So the space between the bushes is getting a little larger. I'll continue the path now through the bushes here. Just like that. And I'll wet that down. The forest is making good progress for day one, but it is starting to get dark out, so I'll have to come back and finish up tomorrow. Hi everyone, we're back for day two. I went to bed last night and I wasn't very happy with the planting of this forest. The planting looked good, but I don't want it to just look good. I want it to look the best it can. So I thought, well, I can fix this. I've got to fix it. I studied the planting and I had to figure out, well, what don't I like about it? And what I don't like about it is the symmetry in the pot. Let me get my fingers out here. I have like an equal space on each side of the pot. So I was trying to cover up, the one side of the pot, and I think that looks better. When I shifted the forest off center, when I initially planted it, I think I shifted it the wrong way. I think I should have shifted it to the left-hand side and not to the right-hand side. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove all the soil from this side and shift the forest to this side. And I think the height for this clump of 3 trees is good. But I don't like the fact that this clump of trees is at the same planting height as this clump of trees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the planting down the middle and lower this side of the forest and keep this side high. I think by changing those 2 things, shifting it to the left-hand side and lowering the clump on the right-hand side, I think that's going to make it look really good. I'll start by digging out the soil on this side, so I'll remove my rock and I'll have to remove all the moss. We'll put it in this tray here. I can replant all this moss, so I'm going to remove my path even. This is the edge of the original planting, so I can dig out all my soil now. There was one more thing I wanted to correct. The main tree here, it's leaning slightly back in the planting, so I just want to bring that forward a bit. So I'll have to put a little more soil underneath this section to bring that tree forward. I'm going to try and shift the entire forest now. So here I go. I think that worked quite well. Next, I'll try and straighten out that main tree, tilting it forward a bit. And I forgot to put my drainage screen back in the drainage hole, so I'll do that. Okay, let's get the drainage screen in for starters. Like that. And then I'll get some soil underneath the main tree here. Put 2 scoops and try that. And see if I can get it tilting forward a bit. I've got to make sure all these trees stay vertical too. So it looks good. It's nice and vertical now. My next task will be to separate the right hand side and try and lower it down. So I'll have to separate these trees through the middle here and then scrape the bottom and try and get it so there's this level, the next level, and then the highest level over here. I'm going to start by removing all the rocks in here. And I can always put them back. Well, that's a big rock, that one. I think I will have to remove this rock. It's a really nice rock. I just hope it doesn't crumble away on me here. It's got a lot of steps in it. It looks really good. Okay, so I have a line that I can kind of separate all this down here. So I think I'm going to see if it pulls apart at all. Not too easily. I don't really want to cut the roots if I can avoid it. So I'll see by using the root rake if I can kind of divide the roots without cutting them. To break this forest into 2 pieces. I did a good job watering. I can see the soil's nice and moist down there, but not too wet. And I'll go around the back and I'll try and separate it from there too. Summer is the second best time for repotting, but you don't want to do as much root work in summer as you can in spring. You kind of light trimming only in summer. In spring you can get away with pruning a little harder. So I'm beginning to separate these two clumps of trees. There we go. Now I should be able to lift away this clump, like so. I'll remove as much soil as I can from this side, just leaving a thin layer. Just have a thin layer of soil in the pot now. And I'll start working on this clump. I'll remove as much soil from the bottom as I can. The roots look really good and healthy on this. Now they've grown quite well since I repotted it last. So I'm not, doing any root pruning here. I'm just combing them out so the trees won't suffer at all. I'll take a little bit off the back here. And now I can try placing it back in the pot. So here I go. I've got them separated a little wider than they were before, so I'm going to go have a look at it and see what it looks like. I'm out front now looking at the forest, and I don't like that huge gap in the middle. It separates the one forest into two forests, or one clump of trees into two. Yeah, I think it needs to be brought a little closer. I do like the height of it though. I think that was good to correct the height, to get that clump on the right hand side a little lower. So I'll try closing that gap up, bring the two clumps closer together and see how it looks. So I brought them a little closer together, and that definitely looks better. It's looking more like a forest, but I think it still has to go a little closer. I've moved the two clumps closer together, and I think that's looking pretty good. There's a slight gap between them, which is kind of nice. It breaks up the group of 3 on the left-hand side and the group of 5 on the right-hand side. So I think that's looking much, much better. I'm happy about this. I think it was worth doing. I'm going to have to redo all my terrain now, which, isn't a big deal, but I have I'm going to have to redo my pathways, rethink some of them, and that kind of thing. But I'll continue. I'm liking the general arrangement of the trees. I filled in some of the soil around the exposed roots, and now I'll give it a good watering. I'm liking this little cliff area in here, so I'm going to check out my stones and try positioning them to kind of give a cliff face there and have my path up here. I've been arranging the rocks, and I'm fairly happy with this arrangement. The path leads your eye back towards here. The rocks also lead your eye in this direction, and I have another row of rocks back here that also kind of all point to a vanishing point in the distance. I've got my trees in place, I've got my rocks in place, so now it's time to apply the moss. I may put some rocks in this cliff face if I ever can find the right ones, but for now I'll put moss in there. As I'm applying the moss, I'm always stepping back and watching the progress from the distance to make sure everything's looking good. This area of the planting gets the full sun. It's not under the shadow of the trees, so I'm going to cover it with moss and it'll look like grass growing. I've got the moss all planted, so I'm just picking out the little pieces of perlite that are showing on the surface. My next step with the planting is to re-establish my pathways through the forest. My main pathway comes down these stone steps around the front, and then it just kind of disappears. So I'm going to have to continue the path alongside here. So I'll prune this moss down and make a flat pathway going to the back of the planting. So here I go. The pathway's looking good, but I am going to have to build this area up a bit. It's not wide enough here, so I might put a rock in this place and kind of build up a little bit of a ledge there. That gives enough width to the path there. I'll have to put a little more moss around here to make these rocks less noticeable. I'll add some sand to the pathway now. Alright, I'll wet that down. This just kind of blends the pathway in more, so it's not quite so noticeable. There, I think that looks good. I'll finish up with a little more pruning to my moss bushes. I finished pruning up the bushes, and I'm standing back having a look at it, and I think everything's looking pretty good. It's getting quite dark out now, and it's not because it's late in the day, but because it's supposed to rain, and it is starting to spit just a little bit. So I'm going to wrap it up today. I'll give you a tour of the landscape and show the back of the planting. That's all the work I'll be doing today on the larch forest. I'll be refining the landscape as it gets closer to showtime this fall. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me here today in the Bonsai Zone.